Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into something quite unique. This is a beer from Mikerphone Brewing Company. It's called Big Daddy Kandy Kane, and it is a Berliner Weisse style beer brewed with candy canes, hence the name. Kind of an interesting ingredient choice. I'm not sure exactly what to expect, but it sounded unique, so I was going to try it. This specific beer clocks in at 5.25% ABV. Mikerphone Brewing is based in Elk Grove, Illinois. So starting with the label art, the very obvious, it obviously is striped as a candy cane would be, so it definitely gives you a sense of what to expect. But in a lightly sour beer style, this ought to be a really interesting thing. It's not a combination of flavors I ever would have thought of or thought that I would see, but nonetheless, here it is. So we're gonna do this. Big old can today, so we're just gonna use our all-purpose glass. Get this poured. Oh, that's actually a really nice color to it too. It's almost the color of like peach or like peach candy or peach soda. That the red striping in it definitely imparted some color to the beer. It actually looks quite nice. Quite a nice looking beer. Yeah, visually, that's lovely. I mean, it's nice and light. Almost that straw color like you would imagine you would normally see in a Berliner, but the dye from the red stripes and the candy canes bled into the beer, so it added this kind of blush hue to it. So yeah, looks very, very nice. Nice looking beer. Very active in terms of carbonation. Most of what I see here is medium size in terms of bubbles. So yes, it did attempt to form a head at the beginning, but it's already completely out of the way. We'll have just a little residual cling like you always get in a sour. But looks great. Let's give it a sniff. So that does have an interesting aroma. It definitely smells like you would expect a Berliner Weisse to. So there's a little bit of sour, a little bit of tart on the nose, and you can for sure smell that underlying kind of baked good grain quality to it that this beer style is definitely known for. But on the aroma, you're definitely getting this peppermint aroma, but it doesn't smell like candy canes or peppermint candy. It smells more like actual peppermint oil. That's what I'm getting off of it. So it has a more kind of herbaceous or natural kind of vibe to it than it does synthetic and processed like candy. So it's going to be interesting, but it smells great, looks great. Interesting beer. Let's jump in and see what this one's about. Okay, yeah, this is actually quite nice. It's not weird. Well, I guess the combination of ingredients is weird, but the way that it presents itself in the beer is not weird at all. It's actually very enjoyable, very fresh. It tastes very lively. This, to me, is a really good example of how to come up with something unique, but not to go overboard. Like the balance on this, I'm really, really liking, because this could have been a completely different direction with this beer altogether, but I think that they really got something here. So first thing I could tell you is all of the standard hallmarks you would expect in a Berliner Weisse are absolutely present. Just like you got them in the aroma, it's also true in the flavor profile. So up front, the very first thing that you get is a little bit of sour, a little bit of tart. This is not a kettle sour beer. This is a Berliner Weisse. It's a light souring, and that comes through very clearly, as well as the classic, very classic underlying malt bill. It's one of those that taste very baked good-like. So it's almost like fresh grain crackers or crumb or toast or bits of biscuit. It's got this baked good quality to it, very grainy. Very, very nice. Very nice malt bill. All the classic hallmarks are coming through. But where the candy canes in this beer come into play is almost that same element that I got on the aroma, where it doesn't smell like processed candy or sugar so much as it smelled like real peppermint oil. That's almost the same experience I'm getting into this beer, or almost like a really good candy cane ice cream. Not really like a mint chocolate chip because there's no chocolate element, but just think of mint ice cream. If you've ever had mint, or like around Christmas time, sometimes they will have ice cream with candy cane bits in it. It has that strong intensity of peppermint without it tasting sugary or artificial. So that kind of peppermint oil natural aroma, that's kind of the same way the flavor is presenting itself. It's very clearly peppermint, but it's not over the top. It almost adds this brightness to the beer. It's almost, I'm trying to find the best way to put this into words. It livens it up with this minty freshness, but it's not an intensity of mint. So it's got almost like this minty cool effect like you would expect a mint to impart, but it's not really doing anything weird or funny with the flavor. It's adding this unique, separate element to this beer drinking experience that's really, really nice and frankly, I think works in this beer style. It almost makes me wonder what other types of beers you could get away with doing some kind of mint exchange, but it's very, very nice. So I'm gonna jump back in this one for body and mouthfeel. Gonna let these flavors intensify, see if I missed anything, and then we'll talk about the finish, but a very nice beer. Cool concept, and it worked out beautifully here. Sour, tart. That baked good profile is opening up. You do get that peppermint almost in tandem with the sour and tart. That does come on first. And I'll tell you, this peppermint is very clearly peppermint, but there's something about the way that it marries with the flavors in the malt bill and the kind of sour and tart effect up front that almost makes it take on this like there's some underlying fruit, or like it was maybe aged on some peels or something. It does have this fruity quality. I can't put my finger on it, but it doesn't just taste like a Berliner Weisse plus mint. It's got a lot of layers of depth to it, a lot of complexity. There's that kind of cool, fresh feeling you're getting from that peppermint oil. And it's really, really nice. This is a very enjoyable beer. So really just got to re-intensify. I'm really loving that malt bill. All the subtlety that I expect to find in a Berliner Weisse is present. This is such a good beer. This is very well done. Candy cane was perhaps, you could say, a risky ingredient choice, but I think it paid off here. Very inventive, and what they ended up making was a very unique and very tasty Berliner Weisse. I'm a fan of this one. In terms of how this finishes, it's not quite as astringently dry as you get on the end of some. It's very subtle. This is kind of a tip of the tongue, and it takes about 30, 35, 40 seconds to get there. It feels still very wet. It doesn't dry the mouth out until the very, very end. Then you get that little bit of crispness just on the end of the tip of your tongue. It's very, very nice. Overall, I'm a fan of this one. This is well done. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're gonna get it ranked. Again, this was Mikerphone Brewing Company's Big Daddy Kandy Kane, a Berliner Weisse brewed with peppermint candy canes, clocking in at 5.25% ABV. Mikerphone Brewing is based in Elk Grove, Illinois. So starting with the aroma on this beer was great. It really had all of the hallmarks of a classic, just standard, no additives Berliner Weisse. But then the candy cane added this really nice, subtle peppermint aroma coming off of it. And it didn't smell artificial at all. It actually smelled just like pure peppermint oil, or like you take a mortar and pestle and grind fresh peppermint leaves. It was really nice, and it added this nice extra dimension to it. Overall, the aroma gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste on this beer was equally as impressive. This was a very, very classic underlying Berliner Weisse malt bill. Had that very baked good quality to it. Nice bit of tartness and a nice bit of sourness up front. And then just as nice and unartificial as the aroma side for the peppermint, the same was true in the flavor profile. It really did just taste like true fresh peppermint. It didn't taste processed at all. And it added this nice livening. It kind of brightened up the beer style, added this nice kind of minty cooling effect. And it wasn't a combination I was sure would work well in this beer style, but it absolutely did. I think it was even better for it. There were even some interesting subtle kind of fruit notes that were coming out of this one I didn't expect. Overall, I thought the flavor was fantastic. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a nice light beer. At the ABV range for the style, that's what you expect. Sometimes they can go light, medium light, somewhere in there, but this was textbook. Body does get a 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel, same story here. It didn't feel super viscous. It didn't get super creamy when you agitated it. Had really the right amount of viscosity. It felt right. Mouthfeel gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish. The finish on this beer was certainly longer than your average Berliner Weisse, but not in a negative way. It was really this kind of peppermint that helped push it out, just this lingering kind of minty coolness on the back of the palate. But overall, everything else tasted and kind of finished very, very right. One thing that was a little bit of a deviation from the norm, but it did finally get there, was the amount of time that had to elapse before there was a little bit of a crisp drying effect on the palate. This one took about 30 to 40 second range and then just on the tip of the tongue, but it was there. Overall, the finish gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention, as with most sours, this one will try to start to form a head when you're first pouring. You're pouring it in the glass, but immediately got out of the way. That's what you want. The head and retention gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this beer was actually really, really beautiful to look at in the glass. You could tell it had that underlying light straw pale yellow color to it, but the red striping from the candy canes leached some of that color into the base beer, so it almost had this kind of orangey pinkish blush peach-like color to it. It was absolutely lovely. Appearance does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer I thought was well above average, to be certain. Really the only thing that I kept coming back to in my mind as I was really examining this over the long haul, coming up with my tasting notes and scores, was for putting the peppermint in. I think that the amount that they added really paid dividends, but what I would have liked just to kind of counterbalance, not saying it should diminish that aspect, and this is not a beer style that's like a kettle sour, and we talked about this, but a little extra tart and sour on the front, I think overall would have kind of balanced the whole thing just a little bit better. And it was really just due to the overall length of the impression you got on the peppermint. Sure, the malt bill was there as it should be, but I would have liked just a little bit more of a kick from the sour and the tart up front. I only docked 1 point though. The balance does get a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I really enjoyed this beer. I thought this was well above average. I didn't think it was perfect, and it was really just a few little minor things that I had with it. One I just talked about. The second was really how the finish presented itself. It was longer than average, and that's not in and of itself a bad thing. It's a little deviation from the norm, but this did have an additive in it. But for me, it was that classic crispness that you expect on the end. It was just a little too subtle. It did come, but it took a very long time, and it was very subtle, just the very tip of the tongue. I like just a little bit more dryness that comes out of this beer style. Again, though, I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Finally, example of the style? Well, it only lost 2 points, and in the grand scheme of things, I think it earned full marks as an example. I did give it a 10 out of 10 in that category, which does bring the total score of Mikerphone Brewing Company's Big Daddy Kandy Kane to a 98 out of 100. So this was a very unique, a very interesting beer. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I really enjoyed what I got out of it. Not a combination of flavors I ever would have thought of, but it absolutely worked in this beer style, and Mikerphone really pulled it off. Overall, they crafted a very unique and a very good beer. If you're a fan of Berliner Weisses, this is one I would definitely consider grabbing, just to say you tried it at least once. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.